168 million Americans watched in shock as Jasmine Crockett stood face-to-face with Donald Trump inside the Capitol. In just 21 seconds, she ripped through his demand for loyalty, exposing Republicans who had knelt at his feet like servants to a king. The air cracked with rage, gasps, and disbelief, a nation torn between submission and defiance. And as the cameras rolled, one question thundered louder than Trump's was, how far will America kneel before it finally stands up? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The cameras snapped on with a blinding flood of light, and every network from CNN to Fox cut straight to Capitol Hill. The chamber was suffocatingly quiet, but the silence broke the moment heavy doors swung open. Donald Trump walked in like a conquering general, flanked by aides in dark suits, his chin raised just high enough to radiate contempt. The smug grin curled on his face told the audience everything. This was his stage, his kingdom. Reporters' pens froze midair when he leaned into the microphone and declared, "Republicans stand tall because they kneel when I command." Gasps rippled through the room. Some in the audience chuckled nervously, unsure if it was a joke. Others recoiled, mouths slightly open, as if they had just witnessed a mask slip to reveal something far darker beneath. The camera zoomed in on Trump's hand, gripping the podium with force, his gold cufflinks flashing under the spotlights. On the scrolling live feed, comments poured in like wildfire. Did he just say that out loud? He owns them. They kneel for him. This is insane. He thinks he's a king. America was watching, and for a chilling moment, it felt like time itself had slowed. Then the lens found her, Jasmine Crockett. Rising from her seat with the deliberate calm of someone who had prepared for this exact moment, she stepped into frame. Dressed in a sleek black suit that caught the light like armor, she did not rush. She moved like a storm gathering strength, each step echoing across the chamber floor. Her eyes burned with a fire that could melt steel, locking directly onto Trump's figure at the podium. In that instant, she wasn't just a congresswoman from Texas, she was every American who refused to kneel, every forgotten voice that demanded to stand tall against power. The contrast was cinematic, Trump asking in arrogance, Crockett radiating defiance. The networks replayed his line over and over in split screen, his sneering face beside her sharp gaze. Reporters whispered, aides shifted uncomfortably, and even seasoned senators glanced nervously toward the exits. Something electric filled the chamber, something primal. Viewers at home gripped their armrests, sensing that the moment was bigger than a speech, bigger than politics. This was a collision course set in motion, a storm seconds from breaking. Trump smirked, raising his chin higher, clearly enjoying the tension. He believed the room, the party, even the country bent to his will. But the audience could feel it. His words had ignited something he didn't control. Crockett lifted her chin, and for a brief flicker, her lips tightened into the ghost of a smile. It wasn't the smile of amusement. It was the calm, razor-thin smile of someone who had just loaded her first bullet and aimed it at the most dangerous man in America. Every eye in the chamber shifted back and forth between the two figures, the king and the challenger, the tyrant and the warrior. A hush settled so deep you could hear the hum of the cameras, the shallow breathing of senators, even the faint shuffle of feet in the gallery. The tension didn't just sit in the air, it strangled it. Viewers across the nation leaned closer to their screens, feeling their own pulse quicken, knowing they were about to witness history erupt live. But one question loomed, rising in every mind, heavy and unshakable. How do you confront a man who believes an entire party kneels at his feet? The silence cracked like glass under pressure when Trump leaned forward, his voice dripping with disdain. Jasmine Crockett is nothing more than a puppet of the left. A loudmouth nobody who thinks shouting makes her important. His words cut across the chamber like a whip, the insult deliberate, rehearsed, designed to humiliate. A few Republicans chuckled, too eager to prove their loyalty, their laughter echoing like a pack of hyenas in the stillness of the room. Jasmine did not flinch. She rose from her seat, as though pulled upward by the gravity of history itself, her back straight, her breath steady. The camera zoomed in, framing her face, eyes blazing, jaw clenched, shoulders squared against the storm. And then, with a voice that thundered through every microphone, she unleashed a sentence that would reverberate across the nation. Only cowards kneel before a tyrant. I stand for democracy. The chamber erupted. Gasps, shouts, the scrape of chairs, the thrum of outrage colliding with applause. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras pivoted to catch every angle, and the control rooms of major networks scrambled to replay her words, flashing captions across screens. Crockett defies Trump on live TV. Social media ignited within seconds. Twitter flooded with hashtags, #StandWithJasmine, #NoKneeling, #TyrantTrump. The clash wasn't just inside the chamber. It was spreading into living rooms, bars, and subway stations across America. Trump's face hardened, the smirk vanishing into a tight grimace. His hand gripped the podium so tightly his knuckles whitened. He had expected fear, submission, a trembling silence, but instead, Crockett had detonated a line of defiance that burned through his theatrics. His eyes darted toward the GOP bench, searching for backup, but even there, unease flickered in the faces of those sworn to kneel. Some shifted in their seats, unwilling to meet his gaze, their loyalty suddenly burdened with shame. Jasmine stepped forward, the click of her heels echoing like war drums. The camera followed her every move, the audience at home holding its breath as if each step carried them closer to a confrontation they had waited years to see. She did not shout again. Her silence now was louder than any insult, a silence that forced Trump to feel the weight of her defiance. When she finally stopped, just a few feet from the podium, the tension was unbearable. A single voice from the gallery broke through. "Stand tall, Jasmine." It was raw, human, desperate, and in that moment, the crowd roared, not in unison, but in chaotic affirmation. Trump tried to speak, but the noise drowned him. His power, the power of commanding obedience, was slipping. Every screen across America froze on the image, Trump's face tight with rage, Crockett's figure unyielding, the chamber alive with chaos. It wasn't just politics anymore, it was a reckoning, a fracture line splitting open for the world to see. And as millions leaned closer to their screens, their hearts pounding with the electricity of the moment, one question seared itself into the air like a challenge to history itself. Was her defiance the spark of a movement toward the beginning of her destruction? The clip of Jasmine Crockett standing tall spread across America faster than wildfire. By the time the hearing ended, cable news was already split into two parallel realities. On Fox News, anchors rushed to defend Trump, insisting he had been misunderstood, spinning his words as a joke taken out of context. Chiron screamed, "Crockett grandstands, Trump remains in control." Yet on MSNBC, the replay of Jasmine's defiant shout rolled on a loop, framed with blazing red letters, "Only cowards kneel before a tyrant." Within an hour, the video had crossed 10 million views, hashtags flooded every social platform, and ordinary Americans began posting their own videos, standing tall in their kitchens, classrooms, and workplaces, declaring, "We will not kneel." The nation felt like it was tilting on its axis. Talk radio stations lit up with callers' voices trembling with anger, disbelief, hope. On one conservative channel, a MAGA loyalist raged, "She's a disgrace, she should be expelled." But then, on live television, a Vietnam veteran's voice broke through the static. He spoke slowly, gravelly, his words soaked in the weight of memory. "We fought so no one kneels to a man like him. That's not the America I bled for." The host sat in silence, unable to interrupt, as the studio froze and the call spread across social media like an anthem of defiance. Out on the streets, the reaction was immediate and visceral. In Dallas, a group of college students projected Jasmine's viral moment onto the side of a skyscraper, her words blazing 20 stories high against the night sky. In New York, subway riders erupted into spontaneous applause when someone played the clip on a phone. In Ohio, a teacher paused her class, replayed the video, and asked her students, "What does it mean to stand when everyone else kneels?" These small, scattered sparks began stitching themselves into something larger, a rhythm pulsing beneath the nose of politics. But not everyone was cheering. At a rally in Florida, Trump supporters burned an effigy of Jasmine, chanting "Kneel or leave." The footage ran side by side with the jubilant images of her supporters, a portrait of a nation cleaved in two. The country was holding its breath, every headline, every conversation pulling tighter on the question of whether this was just another viral moment or the opening shot of something much bigger. In living rooms across America, families argue over dinner, voices raised, plates pushed aside. In churches, pastors debated from the pulpit whether silence was complicity. And in union halls, workers nodded solemnly, whispering that finally someone had said what they had felt for years, that bending to power was not strength, it was surrender. The camera of history seemed to linger, watching as one congresswoman's defiance rippled outward, colliding with millions of hearts. The screen faded slowly to black, but the sound of her words still echoed in the silence, daring a nation to choose its stance. And the question that now thundered across living rooms, newsrooms, and streets alike was no longer whispered but shouted in defiance. Was this the birth of a new resistance or the spark that would set America ablaze? The chamber trembled as Trump slammed both hands on the podium, his voice ripping through the speakers like thunder. "I am America," he roared, the veins on his neck bulging, spittle flying into the hot glow of the camera lights. His words weren't a declaration, they were a threat, a warning to anyone daring enough to question his throne. Senators flinched, staffers froze mid-note, and the gallery erupted into gasps. Jasmine didn't flinch. She leaned back slightly, a smirk cutting across her face, and spoke with the calm precision of a blade slicing through silk. "No. America is the people you betray." Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried, clear and undeniable, echoing in the kind of silence that falls before lightning strikes. For a split second, the room held its breath as though waiting for the ceiling to collapse. Trump's jaw clenched, his knuckles whitened against the wood of the desk, and his face twisted into a mask of pure rage. He lunged forward, gripping the microphone so hard the metal screeched. His words came out not as sentences, but as explosions. You are nothing. You are a disgrace, a fraud, a piece of shit." The insult detonated in the chamber, ricocheting off marble walls. Some Republicans chuckled nervously, desperate to appease him, but their laughter died quickly as they realized the nation was watching every twitch of their cowardice in real time. The networks went into frenzy. CNN Nankas gasped live on air, replaying the slur with wide eyes. MSNBC ran split-screen footage, Trump's furious face beside Jasmine's smirk, their captions screaming, "Trump meltdown, Crockett defiant." Even Fox News anchors stumbled over their defense, their voices cracking under the weight of his words. On Twitter, millions of Americans type furiously, hashtags igniting, hashtag Trump meltdown, hashtag stand with Jasmine, hashtag I am not America. Inside the chamber, chaos brewed. Reporters stood from their seats, cameras zoomed in, aides whispered into phones, rushing to draft statements. The gallery buzzed with the electric chaos of history unfolding live. Jasmine, still unshaken, took a single step forward, her heels striking like gunfire on the floor. Her eyes locked on Trump's, not with fear, but with something far more dangerous, pity. "You see," she said, her voice steady, slicing through the din. "This is what happens when a man mistakes himself for a nation. He curses, he spits, he threatens. But he cannot hide the truth. America isn't you. It never was, it never will be." The room went silent again, but this silence was different, heavier, sharper, filled with anticipation. Trump's breathing was ragged, his face flushed crimson, the camera zooming close enough to catch the tremor in his lip. He looked less like a commander and more like a cornered animal, thrashing against a cage of his own making. And as millions watched with jaws clenched, one question clawed its way into the conscience of a fractured nation. Just how far will Donald Trump go to silence the one voice that refuses to kneel? The chamber still vibrated with Trump's venom, the echo of piece of shit clinging to the marble walls like smoke. But Jasmine didn't strike back in anger. She inhaled slowly, steadied herself, and let her eyes drift past Trump, past the sneering faces on the GOP bench, past even the cameras. She spoke not just to the room, but to the ghosts who had fought before her. Her voice softened, low at first, but deliberate. "I think of Martin Luther King Jr. marching in Selma, beaten but unbroken. I think of Rosa Parks, refusing to give up her seat, sparking a revolution with the power of a single word. No. I think of John Lewis, skull-cracked by billy clubs, still rising again and again because justice demanded it." The images hit like lightning across the minds of millions watching at home. News producers scrambled to overlay black and white footage, showing grainy clips of marches, buses, and blooded faces, history colliding with the present moment in real time. The chamber fell eerily still. Jasmine's voice grew stronger, cutting through the silence like a church bell. These giants stood so that America could stand too. They knew what it meant to face hatred, to be spat on, to be beaten, to be told they were nothing, yet they refused to kneel. And today, in this chamber, in front of the man who claims he is America, I refuse to kneel as well. Reporters stopped typing. A woman in the gallery stifled a sob. One senator shifted in his seat, blinking rapidly, fighting something that looked dangerously like shame. Then Jasmine pivoted, her tone hardening. But this fight is not history, it's now. I think of the little boy you ported while fighting cancer, ripped from his mother's arms in the dead of night. I think of the daughters who watched their parents shackled at the border, their cries ignored by an administration that saw them as numbers, not humans. I think of the families I've met who beg for nothing more than a fair hearing, only to be silenced and discarded like trash. This is what kneeling to power looks like, and this is what I stand against. Her words pierced deeper than any insult. The cameras caught a Republican aide lowering his eyes, lips tight. The audience online flooded with tears and fury, parents hugging their children tighter as they watch, immigrants nodding through screens, whispering, "She speaks for us." Trump shifted uncomfortably, his rage momentarily eclipsed by something else uneasy. He banged his fist on the podium, but his interruption was swallowed whole by the sound of sniffling, by the quiet rustle of tissues in the gallery, by the raw humanity Jasmine had summoned into the room. And then she delivered her final blow, her voice trembling not with weakness, but with the unbearable weight of truth. I carry their names, their faces, their cries with me every time I rise. And I will not stop until America remembers who it is supposed to be. So I ask you all, not as Republicans or Democrats, not as politicians or pundits, but as people, will we continue to kneel to fear, or will we finally stand together for freedom? The chamber froze in suspended silence, every heartbeat magnified, every tear caught on camera. And the question spread like fire, burning its way into the conscience of a nation. Can one voice carry the weight of an entire people's history, or will that weight crush her before America dares to stand? The instant Jasmine's words hit the airwaves, the digital battlefield ignited. Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, and even Truth Social flooded with fury and devotion in equal measure. Hashtags erupted like firecrackers. Hashtag stand up. Hashtag no kneeling. Hashtag Crockett vs. Trump. Within minutes, Jasmine's defiant stance had been replayed tens of millions of times, dissected, remixed, and weaponized. Clips of her voice, "Only cowards kneel before a tyrant," were stitched over protest footage, old civil rights marches, even memes mocking Trump's outburst. The internet didn't just watch, it chose sides. In Texas, cameras caught a Latino construction worker wiping sweat from his brow, speaking to a local reporter with tears in his eyes. "Jasmine speaks for us. I've been treated like I don't belong here my whole life. For once, someone stood up for people like me." His words went viral, resonating across immigrant communities who had felt invisible for decades. Churches replayed Jasmine's speech during services. School teachers paused lessons to ask their students, what does it mean to stand when others kneel? In barbershops and diners, her name was on every tongue. But in Florida, the backlash was ferocious. Outside a courthouse in Miami, a group of MAGA supporters gathered, waving flags and chanting Trump's name. Cameras rolled as one man doused a poster of Jasmine in lighter fluid and set it ablaze, the flames licking the night sky. "Traitor," they screamed. The image of her face burning spread across right-wing media, used as proof of patriotism, while critics saw only a grotesque display of hatred. The divide wasn't just political, it was tribal, emotional, a wound splitting open for the world to see. On cable news, the lines hardened. Fox News anchors doubled down, accusing Jasmine of race-baiting and playing victim, while MSNBC hailed her as a new voice of moral resistance. CNN panels raged late into the night, one conservative strategist snapping, "She's trying to spark another civil war." Another guest fired back, "She's trying to finish the work our heroes began." Ratings soared as networks realized this wasn't just a story, it was the story, one that touched every nerve in the body of America. Meanwhile, Truth Social lit up with Trump's fury in real time. "Jasmine Crockett is a disgrace. She hates America. She hates you." His post was shared millions of times, sparking rallies, threats, and promises of revenge. Yet on Twitter, Jasmine's words were being painted on murals in Los Angeles, printed on T-shirts in Chicago, and blasted through speakers at rallies in New York. Two nations were forming in the same borders, watching the same footage, but drawing opposite conclusions. In living rooms, families screamed at each other over dinner tables. Fathers stormed out, sons slammed doors, daughters cried, Mothers begged for calm. The country wasn't debating anymore, it was tearing itself open. And as midnight approached, one truth began to sink in, chilling in its clarity. Jasmine Crockett had lit a match in a room soaked with gasoline. The fire was no longer hers to control. The only question now was whether it would burn away the chains of fear or consume the entire house called America. Is this division tearing the nation beyond repair, or is it the crucible from which a stronger America might be born? The uproar from Jasmine's defiance had barely settled when another detonation ripped through the political landscape. CNN cut into their late-night panel with a breaking headline, the kind that freezes a nation mid-breath. Exclusive. Secret footage from GOP closed-door meeting. The screen flickered, then sharpened into grainy cell phone video. Viewers leaned forward, hearts pounding, as the impossible unfolded before their eyes. There, in a chandelier-lit private suite, a half-circle of Republican senators and representatives stood before Trump. The video captured them one by one lowering to their knees as Trump raised his hand like a monarch bestowing favor. The sound was muffled, but his voice was unmistakable. This is loyalty. This is power. This is how we win. Gasps exploded across America. Some viewers dropped their remotes, others shouted at the television as if it could hear them. For years, critics accused the GOP of kneeling figuratively. Now the proof was literal, undeniable, immortalized in pixels. Within minutes, every network ran the footage. The clip replayed in slow motion, zooming in on trembling hands clasped like supplicants, faces downturned, lips moving in what looked like whispered pledges. Social media combusted. On Twitter, #KneelGate trended alongside #StandWithJasmine. Truth Social tried to suppress the clip, but the more Trump's allies denied it, the more viral it became. America wasn't just watching, it was judging. Inside the chamber, phones lit up like 1,000 fireflies as senators, aides, and journalists received the notification at the same time. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Trump's face drained of color, then flushed crimson. He pounded the desk, shouting over the roar of shock, "Fake. Edited. Lies." But the panic in his eyes betrayed him. The evidence was too raw, too visceral. The silence from those caught on tape was louder than any denial, and then Jasmine struck. She stepped forward, her black suit catching the light like battle armor, her voice slicing through the chaos with merciless clarity. "Look at them. Look closely. These are not leaders. These are not servants of the people. They don't serve you. They kneel to him." The chamber quaked under her words. Cameras zoomed in on Republican senators squirming in their seats, sweat beading on foreheads, eyes darting anywhere, at the screen replaying their humiliation on loop. The gallery erupted, half in cheers, half in shouts. Reporters yelled over each other, microphones shoved forward, trying to capture the exact second the GOP facade cracked wide open. Out on the streets, people poured into bars and sidewalks, watching on giant screens, pointing, gasping, jeering. The footage was more than scandal. It was revelation, a mirror reflecting the rot back to the nation. Trump bellowed into the microphone, his voice hoarse, "I am your strength. Without me, you are nothing." But his words fell flat, swallowed by the sight of powerful men and women on their knees. For the first time, the illusion of invincibility fractured on live television, and America saw not kings or warriors but courtiers kneeling at the feet of one man. The air in the chamber turned heavy, suffocating, as though the entire nation was holding its breath. And in that unbearable silence, one question thundered louder than all the no's combined. What happens when the truth is no longer deniable, and the mask of power is ripped away before the eyes of millions? The chamber was a theater of ghosts. The leaked video looped endlessly on the giant monitors, and each time the grainy images were played, the faces of GOP lawmakers in the footage paled further. Some sat frozen in their seats, lips pressed thin, shoulders stiff, as though bracing against a blow they knew was coming. Others looked down at their hands, refusing to meet the eyes of reporters now circling like wolves, cameras trained on every twitch of shame. The Marble Room, once a stage for power, had become a gallery of submission. Trump raged at the podium, shouting words that no longer landed, his fury bouncing hollowly against walls that had heard too many lies. His grip on the room was slipping, and the silence from his allies spoke louder than any of his denials. The image of senators kneeling would not vanish. It had already been etched into the collective memory of millions watching at home. Then, a crack appeared, One figure rose slowly from the Republican bench, the youngest senator in the chamber, his face pale but his jaw clenched. All eyes swiveled as he pushed his chair back with a screech that cut through the chaos. He walked toward the exit with deliberate steps, the weight of 100 cameras trailing him like shadows. Trump snarled his name, demanded he sit back down, but the senator never looked back. The heavy doors groaned open, then slammed shut, the echo ringing like a gunshot through the Capitol. Outside, the swarm of reporters pounced. Microphones shoved forward, voices overlapping, questions fired like bullets. The senator, his tie loosened, his breathing heavy, finally raised his head. His voice was low, but steady, and the words he spoke detonated across every network in seconds. "We are not supposed to kneel, but we do. And we've done it for too long." The crowd gasped, then roared. Some reporters shouted follow-ups, others simply stood stunned, their cameras trembling as they captured the first open crack in Trump's wall of loyalty. Within minutes, the clip appeared on every channel, split-screened beside the leaked footage. Commentators whispered breathlessly, was this the first defection, the first fracture that could split the party wide open? Inside the chamber, Trump's face contorted in disbelief, spittle gathering at the corner of his mouth as he barked into the mic, "Traitor! Weakling, he will be destroyed." But his words rang desperate, tinged with panic. Senators shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some darting glances toward the exit, as if wondering if they too should flee before the collapse came crashing down on them. Jasmine watched it all with hawk-like stillness, her eyes narrowing. She didn't speak this time, she didn't have to. The silence around her was its own declaration, a quiet acknowledgement that the tide had shifted. The mask of invincibility had cracked, and nothing Trump shouted could piece it back together. And as America watched, spellbound by the unraveling, one question pressed harder than ever, carving itself into the heart of the moment. Will these first cracks in the Republican wall spread into a shattering earthquake that changes everything? The chamber was still quaking from the defection of the young senator when Jasmine rose to her full height, her figure framed by the searing white of the television lights. She didn't shout for attention, she commanded it by simply stepping forward. The scrape of her heels against the polished marble floor sliced through the murmurs, silencing reporters, freezing aides, and forcing every eye back to the center of the storm. She fixed her gaze on Trump, who stood gripping the podium with both hands, his knuckles bone white, sweat glistening on his temples. For the first time, he looked less like a king and more like a man cornered by his own shadow. Jasmine let the silence hang until it choked the air, and then her voice rang out, clear as steel on glass. "Stand with the people, or keep kneeling in his shadow." The words detonated like dynamite. Gasps ripped through the chamber, followed by an eruption of voices, cheers from the gallery, shouts of outrage from Trump's loyalists, the fevered clicks of cameras capturing history in real time. The sentence was instantly clipped, uploaded, and spread across social media, captions blazing, "Crockett to GOP, choose the people or Trump." Within seconds, #stand or kneel trended worldwide. Trump's face twisted into a grotesque snarl. He pounded the podium with such force the microphone screeched. "I am the people. Without me, you are nothing." He roared, but his voice cracked on the last word, betraying the fracture within. His fury only made Jasmine stronger. She stepped closer, narrowing the gap until only a few feet separated them. The cameras zoomed tight, America watching, breathless, as a single congresswoman stared down a man who had once ruled like an untouchable. "You don't represent America," she said, her tone sharpening like a blade. "America is not servitude. America is not silence. America is every worker who gets up at 5 a.m. to feed their family. It is every immigrant who dreams of a chance. It is every child who deserves to grow up free from fear, and America is watching you kneel." The gallery erupted into thunderous applause, drowning out Trump's sputtering protests. Some Republicans shifted uneasily, others hung their heads. The young senator who had walked out stood before cameras outside, repeating Jasmine's words like a rallying cry. "Stand with the people, or kneel in his shadow." His voice cracked with emotion, but his defiance electrified the crowd gathered on the Capitol steps. Inside, Jasmine held her ground, her chin raised, her eyes never leaving Trump's. She wasn't just addressing him anymore, she was addressing the entire nation, her voice rising to a crescendo. "This is not about parties. This is not about politics. This is about whether we still have the courage to stand as Americans." So I ask every one of you in this chamber, and every citizen watching across this nation, where will you stand? The chamber shook with the roar of divided voices, cheers clashing with jeers, history colliding with the present. And as the cameras pulled back to capture the chaos, one question ignited across every screen, every living room, every heart. Who will America choose to stand with the people, or the shadow of one man? The chamber had reached a fever pitch when Trump finally snapped. His fists slammed against the podium, rattling the microphones, his face twisted into a mask of rage. Veins bulged along his neck, sweat streaked down his temples, and then the roar came, raw and guttural, shaking the rafters of the Capitol itself. "This is war," he bellowed, the words echoing like cannon fire, jolting the audience into stunned silence before the uproar detonated again. The gallery erupted in gasps and shouts. Reporters scrambled to capture the moment, their voices overlapping in frantic commentary as if the very air had caught fire. Security guards tensed, their hands twitching near their belts, uncertain whether the threat was metaphor or a spark that could ignite something far worse. Trump's loyalists cheered wildly, chanting his name as though it were a battle cry, their voices clashing with the furious boos and cries of shame. From the other side of the chamber, the moderator, pale and visibly shaken, leaned into his microphone, voice cracking as he pleaded, "Order! Order in the chamber," but his words vanished beneath the roar. The Capitol floor was no longer a hearing, it was a battlefield, every sentence another weapon, every gesture another strike. Senators shouted over one another, aides ran with cell phones pressed to their ears, and the cameras never blinked, beaming the chaos into millions of homes where families sat frozen, watching democracy convulse live on air. Trump leaned forward, gripping the podium like it was the last thing tethering him to control. His voice rose again, hoarse but defiant. "They want to destroy me. No, they want to destroy you. They want to take your country, your freedom, your future, and I will not let them." His words weren't arguments, they were gasoline, poured onto the flames already consuming the room. His supporters roared louder, pounding on desks, while others sat shell-shocked, faces ghostly under the glare of television lights. And then the camera cut to Jasmine. She stood motionless, eyes fixed on him, her silence sharper than any retort. While Trump screamed of war, she radiated an unshakable calm, the contrast devastating. The split-screen image flashed across networks. On one side, a man unraveling in fury. On the other, a woman unbroken, her gaze like stone against a tide of chaos. Commentators whisper what millions were already thinking: power was shifting before their eyes. In the gallery, someone shouted, "This is not war, it's America." The words cracked through the din, echoing in the chamber like an uninvited truth. Trump whirled toward the sound, his face flushed scarlet, but the moment had already been claimed. His rage no longer inspired, it revealed fear. Across the country, living rooms buzzed with disbelief. Was this the cry of a strong man preparing to fight, or the unraveling howl of a leader losing his grit? The chamber trembled with the uncertainty, history writing itself in real time, the air suffocating with questions that no one dared to answer aloud. And as the camera zoomed in on Trump's contorted face, his voice cracking beneath the weight of his fury, one question hung heavy over the nation, a question bigger than the man himself. When a leader loses control and declares war on his own people, what rushes in to fill the void? Fear, or the courage to finally stand? Outside the marble walls of the Capitol, a different kind of thunder rolled. Thousands had gathered in the biting night air, their chants pounding like a heartbeat against the stone. "Stand up, don't kneel," they cried, voices layered into one defiant roar that shook the barricades. From above, news drones captured the sea of bodies, homemade signs, American flags, candles flickering in paper cups. The split screen on every network was surreal. Inside, Trump screaming, "This is war." Outside, a nation answering with a single demand: not to kneel. Reporters swarmed among the crowd, shoving microphones toward tear-streaked faces. One camera found a black mother clutching a framed photo of her teenage son, her hands trembling as she tried to steady her voice. On live television, she spoke through sobs that split the night air. "My baby is gone. The police put him face down on the pavement, said he didn't comply. He never got up again. I came here tonight because Jasmine Crockett said we don't kneel to tyrants, and I won't kneel to silence anymore. Not for my son, not for anyone's child." The crowd hushed, as if the entire square had, inhaled at once. Then a ripple of voices rose, swelling until it shook the earth. "Say his name." The mother's knees buckled, but strangers on both sides caught her arms, holding her upright as she wailed her son's name into the microphone. Millions at home wept with her, their living rooms transformed into witnesses' benches, their screens stained with the unbearable weight of her grief. Back inside the chamber, Jasmine's eyes glistened as the footage played on monitors, her jaw set with iron resolve. Trump's scowl deepened, his lips curling as though even the mourning of a mother was a threat to his crown. But the power of her story had already escaped the building, spreading like fire through the veins of a restless nation. For a moment, it seemed the entire country stood frozen inside and outside, the powerful and the powerless, bound together by the tension of a single question that could no longer be ignored. Can pain be transformed into power, or will it drown America before it learns how to rise? The chamber was suffocating, heat rising from bodies pressed forward, the roar of the crowd outside vibrating through the marble floor. Trump was still pacing at the podium, chest heaving, veins pulsing at his temples. His voice cracked with fury as he shouted denials, slurs, anything to claw back control. But no matter how loud he grew, the momentum in the room was shifting, and he could feel it slipping from his grasp. Then, like a crack of thunder cutting across the storm, another voice rose from the Republican bench. It wasn't a whisper. It wasn't hesitation. It was firm, guttural, undeniable. "She's right." The words landed with the force of a hammer blow. Heads snapped toward the sound. Cameras zoomed instantly. And there he was, a senior GOP senator, a man who had stood with Trump for years, his face pale but resolute. He pushed himself up slowly, shoulders square, voice steadying as though decades of silence had finally split open. "We've kneeled long enough." The chamber froze, a heartbeat of stunned disbelief, then erupted. Gasps collided with cheers, reporters shouted over one another, fingers stabbing at phones to blast the quote across the world. Trump spun toward him, eyes bulging, his hand slamming down on the podium hard enough to rattle the water glass. "Sit down, you traitor," he howled, spit flying under the spotlights. But the senator didn't move, he didn't blink. He turned his gaze toward Jasmine, gave a single, sharp nod, and repeated louder this time, "We've kneeled long enough." The gallery detonated into applause, so thunderous, shook dust from the rafters. Viewers at home shot out of their seats, tears and shouts mingling as they replayed the clip over and over. MSNBC broke into coverage with a red banner. "GOP Senator defies Trump." CNN called it a seismic shift. Even Fox hesitated, anchors stammering as they tried to spin the moment but faltered under the sheer force of what the world had just witnessed. Trump's face turned crimson, his finger stabbing at the senator like a weapon. "You'll regret this. You're finished," he screamed, but the threat sounded hollow, drowned out by the crowd's roar and the pounding chant from outside bleeding through the walls. "Stand up. Don't kneel." The senator stood straighter, his hands trembling but his voice growing stronger as cameras zoomed in. "If loyalty means kneeling, then I was never loyal to America, and I won't kneel again." Jasmine's eyes locked with his, and in that brief exchange, silent yet blazing with understanding, the chamber felt history pivot on its axis. It wasn't just her voice anymore. It wasn't just her fight. The dam had cracked, and the water was rushing through. Senators shifted uncomfortably. Whispers rippled along the GOP bench, and America leaned forward in collective suspense. The sound of applause grew into a tidal wave, rattling the chamber as Trump pounded the podium like a desperate man drowning in his own fury. And across the nation, one question thundered louder than his rage, echoing in living rooms, in protests, in whispered prayers. If one dares to stand, will the others finally find the courage to follow, or will fear drag them back to their knees? The cameras did not look away, they zoomed in, merciless, catching every bead of sweat sliding down Trump's temple, every twitch in his jaw, every tremor in his hands as he gripped the podium like a man trying to cling to the last plank of a sinking ship. He forced a smile, stretching his lips into something meant to look defiant, but the grin collapsed halfway, revealing only panic. The illusion of invincibility the mask he had worn for years was cracking live, in high definition, before millions of eyes. Networks pounced. MSNBC splashed their lower third in crimson, Trump cornered by Crockett. CNN ran a split-screen, Trump's shaking hand on one side, Jasmine's unflinching stare on the other. Even Fox, usually his fortress, faltered. One anchor hesitated mid-sentence, eyes darting off camera, before whispering, "He doesn't look well." Ordinary Americans watched and whispered to one another, "He looks weak. He looks scared." And once that thought took root, it spread like wildfire. In the chamber, GOP senators shifted in their seats, exchanging uneasy glances, a few scribbled frantic notes. Others avoided the cameras altogether, staring down at the floor as though it might swallow them. For years, fear had bound them together, Trump's rage their leash. But fear was brittle, and in this moment, it began to splinter. The crowd outside roared louder, their chants vibrating through the walls, drowning out Trump's hoarse voice as he sputtered about fake news and traitors. Nobody was listening. Jasmine didn't move, didn't even blink. Her stillness was the perfect counterpoint to his unraveling, her silence louder than his fury. The power had shifted, and the whole nation could feel it, an empire once built on intimidation now trembling on its foundations. And as the cameras closed in on Trump's broken smile, the question that thundered across every living room and newsroom was no longer whispered but screamed into history itself. What happens when an empire built on fear finally begins to crumble? And those who once knelt realize the chains have rusted away. The chamber snapped like a wire under too much strain. MAGA loyalists in the gallery leapt to their feet, fists pumping, voices colliding into a deafening roar. They screamed Trump's name, pounded the wooden railings, some even hurling folders and papers into the air as if the building itself belonged to their fury. The sound was primal, a mob's rage echoing through marble and steel. A desk overturned with a violent crash, its contents scattering like shrapnel across the floor. Senators recoiled, aides ducked, security moved in but hesitated. The chaos was too thick, too unpredictable, and the cameras were still rolling. Trump grinned through his sweat, eyes gleaming with something feral. This was his arena, his chaos, his proof that loyalty could still be commanded. He raised both arms as if summoning the storm, his voice hoarse but triumphant. "Look at them. They know the truth. You can't silence us." His words blended with the pounding fists, the chants of Trump, 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 until the chamber trembled as though democracy itself was under siege. But then Jasmine rose above the noise. She slammed her hand on the table, her voice cutting like a blade through the madness. "This chaos is his gift to America," she thundered, her words amplified by the stunned silence that followed for a heartbeat. "Broken chairs, broken trust, broken families, that's what he leaves behind. He doesn't lead, he unleashes." Her voice rose higher, fierce, unrelenting. "And every second you let this mob scream for him, you betray the people outside these walls begging for justice." The cameras locked onto her, capturing the fire in her eyes, the steadiness in her frame as the storm raged around her. Trump's grin faltered, replaced with a twitch, then a scowl. His supporters tried to chant louder, but the words faltered when faced with her voice, unyielding, unafraid, undeniable. The chamber was chaos, yes, but it was chaos with a mirror held up to it, forcing America to see itself stripped bare. In living rooms across the country, viewers leaned forward, pulses quickening. Was this the sound of a nation collapsing into disorder, or the last cry before order reclaimed its voice? The split screen showed two visions, Trump basking in bedlam, Jasmine standing against it. And the question that now seared across the conscience of millions was as sharp as a blade pressed to the throat of history. Will chaos consume the truth or expose it for all the world to see? The chamber was still vibrating from the chaos when a hush spread, unexpected and heavy. From the back row of the gallery, a figure rose slowly, leaning on crutches. The cameras swiveled instinctively, catching the gleam of a prosthetic leg beneath worn fatigues. The man's face was weathered, scarred by time and battle, but his eyes burned with clarity. Step by step, he made his way toward the center aisle. The noise softened to a murmur, then to silence, as if even the walls knew something sacred was approaching. Security moved to intercept him, but Jasmine raised her hand, and they froze. Trump sneered at the sight, waving dismissively, but the cameras stayed locked on the veteran as he reached the microphone stand left open in the chaos. He gripped it with both hands, his knuckles trembling not with fear, but with the weight of memory. And then, in a voice that cracked but carried like thunder, he said, "I didn't fight so politicians could kneel." The words detonated across the chamber, a woman gasped loudly in the gallery, a senator dropped his pen, and even Trump faltered, blinking as though he hadn't expected such a strike. The veteran steadied himself and continued, his voice stronger now. "I left my leg in Kandahar, My brothers left their lives in Iraq. We stood when it was hardest to stand, and yet here I see the so-called leaders of this country bowing, groveling, serving one man instead of the people. His voice trembled on the edge of fury, his chest heaving, but every syllable landed with surgical precision. The audience was transfixed. Reporters stopped scribbling, cameras zoomed so tight you could see the tear glinting in his eye. My wife raised our kids alone while I fought overseas. I told them their father was standing for freedom. Now what do I tell them when they see their leaders kneel like servants? His words cracked on the last sentence, and the chamber broke sniffling, hands covering faces, eyes glistening with unspilled tears. Jasmine stepped forward, her own hand pressed to her chest, but she didn't interrupt. She let the weight of his sacrifice hang in the air, unchallenged, undeniable. The man's voice softened, but it cut even deeper. I fought for an America bigger than red or blue. I fought for an America where no one kneels to kings, because we are the people, and the people do not kneel. The gallery erupted, but not with chaos this time with applause, raw and thunderous, a sound that cracked the tension like lightning across a storm. The veteran lowered his head, tears streaking his face, and stepped back, his presence more powerful than any speech could have been. Trump muttered angrily into the microphone, but the room wasn't listening. For the first time, the chamber had heard the cost of loyalty measured not in votes, but in blood, in loss, in the quiet agony of families who had given everything. And as America wept with him, one question burned brighter than all the anger and no's: can the shared sacrifice of ordinary people unite a nation already breaking apart, or will their pain be drowned once more by the hunger for power? The networks knew this was history, and they framed it as such. The screen split into two realities. On the left, Donald Trump gripping the podium, his face crimson, his mouth twisted in rage as he screamed into the microphone, veins bulging with every word. On the right, Jasmine Crockett standing motionless, spine straight as a spear, her eyes unblinking, her silence louder than his fury. The contrast was devastating, one man unraveling, one woman unyielding. America didn't just watch, it chose sides with every heartbeat. In living rooms across the country, families gathered around flickering screens. In Ohio, a father slammed his fork down on the dinner table, pointing at Trump's half of the screen. That's strength. That's a fighter. His teenage daughter shook her head, eyes fixed on Jasmine's calm face. That's desperation. Dad, look at him. He's scared. Their voices collided, echoing the divide ripping through the nation. In a Harlem diner, waitresses huddled around the mounted television, tears streaming as Jasmine's image held steady. One whispered, "She's standing for us. She's standing for every one of us." In a bar in Alabama, men in red caps cheered each Trump outburst, pounding their fists into the table, but even there, a young man sitting quietly in the corner muttered, "She looks braver than him." The bartender caught it, and for a moment, the air hung heavy with the unspoken fracture. Back in the chamber, the tension pressed down like a storm cloud. Trump's words came out as shouts, broken fragments of threats and slogans, his fists hammering the wood as if volume could replace control. Jasmine didn't flinch. She stood like a statue carved from defiance itself, her stillness framed by the storm around her. Every second the cameras held the split screen, the symbolism deepened. Two visions of America locked in combat, one rooted in fear, the other in resolve. Social media lit up with collages of the image. Hashtag sword, hashtag to Americas, hashtag stand or kneel, hashtag the chose. TikTok edits put Jasmine's stillness against the chaos of Trump's tirade. Millions of users writing the same caption, "Who do you trust to lead?" Commentators whispered it live on air. Analysts fumbled to find words, but the image spoke for itself. The nation wasn't watching a debate, it was watching a mirror. And as families argued, as crowds outside chanted, as the chamber trembled with the clash of two worlds, a single question burned itself into the conscience of America, refusing to fade. Whose vision of this country will endure, the one that screams for submission, or the one that stands in silence for freedom? While the Capitol seethed with chaos, the streets of America erupted with something else entirely. From the avenues of New York to the boulevards of Los Angeles, crowds spilled into the night, carrying cardboard signs, homemade banners, and voices that refused to break. "We stand with Jasmine," the chant began as a murmur in one city, then swelled into a tidal roar that spanned the continent. The rhythm of marching feet, The thud of drums, the honk of car horns joining in unison. It felt less like protest and more like an awakening. In Brooklyn, teenagers climbed onto rooftops, projecting Jasmine's defiant words onto brick walls. Only cowards kneel before a tyrant. Passers-by stopped, pulled out phones, and the clip shot around the internet again, gaining millions more views overnight. In Chicago, factory workers leaving their night shifts held their helmets aloft, chanting "Stand up, don't kneel," as the city skyline lit up behind them. In Oakland, teachers marched alongside students, their chalkboards repurposed into signs that read, "History is watching, we will not kneel." California's highways turned into rivers of headlights as caravans of cars paraded with banners tied to hoods, honking in defiance, their horns blaring into the night like war cries. In Texas, where Trump's hold had long felt unshakable, farmworkers gathered in dusty fields under floodlights, holding up handmade placards scrawled in Spanish. "Depike on Jasmine," their voices carried into the night, carried across languages, carried across divides. The images played live on every screen, split panels showing Trump raging in the chamber while America's streets filled with bodies refusing to bend. Commentators tried to analyze, but the truth was too visceral, too raw to be reduced to sound bites. This was no longer a political story. It was a human one, a struggle that had crawled out of marble halls and into the veins of the nation itself. Back in Washington, the chants from outside bled through the Capitol walls, seeping into the chamber like the roar of an approaching storm. Trump shouted louder, but his words dissolved into static against the sound of a people rising. Jasmine tilted her head slightly, listening, her lips curving into the faintest trace of a smile. It was not triumph, it was recognition. She knew the fight had outgrown her voice, it now belonged to millions. And as the camera cut wide, capturing both the raging man inside and the marching masses outside, one question thundered across the republic like a challenge to history itself. Can a movement born in defiance truly reshape the destiny of a broken nation, or will the weight of the past drag it back to its knees? The roar outside rattled the stained glass windows, the chant "Stand up, don't kneel," vibrating through the bones of the Capitol. Inside, the chamber pulsed with tension, every camera red light burning, every microphone catching the sound of history twisting in real time. Trump gripped the podium, opened his mouth to unleash another torrent of fury, then nothing came out. For the first time, silence. His jaw worked, his lips trembled, but no sound followed. His eyes flicked to Jasmine, and the chamber saw something it had never seen before in him: fear. His pupils darted, unfocused, as though searching for an escape in a room with no exits. The man who had demanded loyalty, demanded kneeling, demanded worship, now stood frozen, suffocated by the very stage he once commanded. The cameras tightened their focus mercilessly, zooming in until his face filled the screens of millions of homes. The orange glow was gone, replaced with an ashen pallor, beads of sweat glistening like cracks in porcelain. He looked small, diminished, a statue of arrogance crumbling under the weight of a single stare. And that stare belonged to Jasmine Crockett. She did not move, did not speak, her silence pressed against his silence, an invisible weight crushing the chamber flat. The longer he stood there, mute, the louder the void became. Even his own loyalists shifted uneasily, glancing down, tugging at collars, their masters unraveling reflected in their shame. In living rooms across America, the split screen played once more. Jasmine, steady as steel, unbroken. Trump, pale and trembling, his hands twitching at the edges of the podium. Children whispered to their parents, "Why isn't he talking?" Adults leaned forward, their own voices hushed, as if breaking the moment might shatter it. The silence became contagious. Bars, diners, and airports full of televisions all fell still, the country waiting for a word that would not come. And then Jasmine stepped forward, just once, closing the distance between them by a single, seismic step. Trump's eyes widened, his fingers clenching the podium like a drowning man clutching driftwood. Still, no words came. The man who once boasted he alone could speak for the nation had nothing left to say. The chamber belonged to the silence now, his collapse and her defiance locked in one frame, burned into memory forever. And as the cameras pulled back, showing the once mighty figure dwarfed by the moment he could not control, the question seared itself into the conscience of a fractured nation. What happens when the man who demanded America kneel is finally left standing, alone and silent, before the judgment of history? The silence inside the Capitol had barely settled when the storm outside the walls consumed the world. By dawn, every front page from the New York Times to the Guardian carried the same blazing image: Trump, pale and wordless, locked against Jasmine Crockett's unflinching stare. Headlines screamed across continents: America's reckoning, the silence of power, stand or kneel. The footage replayed in endless loops on CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, each network calling it the most explosive moment in American politics in a generation. On the line, the aftershocks were even more staggering. The hashtag #StandUp roared past 100 million mentions in less than 12 hours, trending simultaneously in 50 countries. TikTok clips of Jasmine's defiance were cut against protest footage in Hong Kong, labor marches in Paris, student rallies in Mexico City. What began in a chamber in Washington had mutated into a global rallying cry. In Texas, a television crew found a farmworker standing in the dirt outside his trailer home, a man whose hands were calloused from decades of labor. He spoke softly, clutching his daughter's hand as cameras rolled. "For the first time, I feel seen. She stood for people like me, and I will never forget it." His words echoed far beyond that small patch of land, rebroadcast in primetime segments, stitched into viral videos, carried into the bloodstream of a restless nation. The moment was no longer just political, it was human, raw, transformative. From union halls to classrooms, from city streets to rural diners, the same question rippled through conversations with the urgency of a prayer. Is this the start of something bigger? A movement that could finally reshape America, or just another spark destined to burn out in the storm? The lights of the chamber had faded, but the echoes still lived inside her chest. Behind the velvet curtain, Jasmine sat alone at a wooden table, a half-empty glass of water beside her, the noise of history still reverberating in the distance. Her hand trembled as she opened a leather-bound journal worn thin from years of private battles. Slowly, deliberately, she wrote across the page, "History remembers those who stood." The ink blurred as a tear dropped, splattering over the words. She let it fall, because tonight the world had seen her strength, but only she knew the weight of the scars. She remembered every jeer hurled her way, being called loud, angry, unfit, the venomous whispers that had followed her through corridors of power. She had been mocked for her voice, her skin, her courage. And yet here she was, carrying not just herself, but millions of unseen lives who had chosen to rise with her. She leaned back, eyes stinging, and replayed the moment when the chamber erupted. Trump's silence, the crowd's roar, the fracture of fear itself. For one breathless second, it hadn't felt like politics. It had felt like deliverance, but with deliverance came a price. Her phone buzzed on the table, vibrating against the wood with relentless messages, threats mixed with prayers, hate alongside hope. The cost of defiance was never just applause. It was sleepless nights, constant danger, and the knowing knowledge that courage always paints a target on your back. She closed her eyes, whispering into the empty room, was it worth it? In the silence, she thought of the farmworker in Texas, the mother who cried on live television, the veteran with one leg who stood taller than any senator that night. They had answered her question without speaking. The world outside demanded more than speeches, it demanded sacrifice. And she knew the choice she made today would echo long after her voice was gone. As her pen pressed harder against the page, she scrawled a final line before snapping the journal shut. The true cost of courage is everything, yet it is the only currency that can buy tomorrow. The chamber was nearly silent now, save for the faint hum of cameras still rolling. Jasmine stepped forward, her hands gripping the podium as though anchoring herself against the storm that had just passed. Her breath was unsteady, but her eyes burned with the fire of someone who had carried both fury and hope through the gauntlet of history. She looked directly into the lens, as if staring into the living rooms of millions of Americans at once. Her voice cracked on the first word, not from weakness but from the unbearable weight of truth. "We will not kneel," she declared, and the words cut through the silence like a blade. "We will stand, not for me. For all of us." Every syllable carried the tremor of her heart, but beneath that tremor was iron. She was no longer speaking as a politician, she was speaking as the echo of every citizen who had ever been silenced, trampled, forgotten. The camera tightened on her face. The tears that clung to her lashes didn't diminish her resolve, they sharpened it. Tonight, you saw who demands obedience, and who demands justice. You saw who bows to power, and who dares to rise against it. The question is no longer about them. It's about us. Will we be a nation that kneels? Or a people that stands? Her words were a dare, a challenge hurled directly into the hearts of those watching in kitchens, bars, and dimly lit bedrooms across the country. For a long moment, she simply held the gaze of the camera, unblinking, unbroken. Then, softer but stronger, she added, "Do not wait for history to write your chapter. Write it yourself. Stand up. Don't kneel. Because America's future is not chosen by the powerful, it is chosen by the brave." And then the screen cut to black, white letters burned onto the void. Stand up. Don't kneel. America's chose. The silence that followed was not emptiness, it was invitation. An invitation to reflect, to rage, to hope, and above all, to act. For the first time in years, the nation did not feel like an audience. It felt like a participant. The story had ended. That the decision raw, urgent, and irreversible had only just begun. True courage is not measured by the absence of fear, but by the choice to rise when kneeling feels easier. Jasmine's stand reminds us that silence is complicity, and obedience to injustice only strengthens it. In our own lives, we face moments large or small when we must decide whether to bow or to stand. It may not be on a stage or before cameras, but it matters just the same. The question is simple, yet defining. When the moment comes, will you kneel to comfort, or will you stand for truth? Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.